In the brutal silence of a forgotten mountain pass, a soldier lay broken, bleeding into the dirt. His uniform was shredded, his breath shallow, his radio crushed. The rest of his unit had pulled out hours ago. They thought he was dead. And maybe, so did he. Pause. Faint wind. Tension builds. But then, through the smoke and ash, came a shadow. For legs. Torn ears. Burnt fur. It was him. The war dog they thought didn't make it. Softer tone. Emotional rise. This dog didn't leave. Didn't retreat. Didn't obey orders to return. He stayed. He stood guard. Hour after hour. Through blazing heat and freezing nights. When wolves circled in the dark. When enemy scouts passed just yards away. Pause. Slower pace. Heavy emotion. This dog never moved. Because for him, that soldier wasn't just a handler. He was his brother. Music swells, slight intensity. And what happened over the next 72 hours shocked even the most hardened warriors. This is the true story of the loyalty no bullet could break, of the bond no war could destroy. Final beat, slower delivery. Special Forces dog refused to leave the wounded soldier. What happened next shocked everyone.
A low growl rumbled through the dust-choked air as the twilight settled over the jagged Afghan ridge. Silence crept across the valley like a predator. The birds had long stopped singing, the winds had grown cautious, and nothing dared to move, except the dog. He crept forward, eyes sharp and ears twitching. His lean, muscled form flowed low to the ground like liquid tension, every sense honed to survival. Blood streaked one paw. Smoke stung his nose. But none of it mattered. His name was Koda, and his eyes were locked on the broken figure sprawled beneath the shattered pine. Staff Sergeant Evan Cole was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. A shard of metal had torn through his thigh, and the left side of his face was crusted with dirt, dried blood, and ash. He had crawled, dragged really, his body across the ground after the blast, but the world had since gone dim, unsteady. All around him, the mission had collapsed into chaos. The explosion had come without warning. One moment, his team was advancing along the narrow ridge, Koda ahead, tail still and ears forward, and the next, a pressure wave had lifted them all off their feet. Cole remembered the sensation of flying, then falling, then silence. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. A warm nose touched his cheek. A soft whimper followed. Then something licked the dirt from his face. Slowly, Cole's eyes blinked open, pain stabbing into his skull like lightning. He tried to move, but his body refused. "Koda," he croaked, voice ragged. The dog was there, right there, pressing close to his side. Still alive. Still with him. Cole let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He raised a trembling hand, resting it on Koda's head. The fur was matted with soot, but familiar beneath his fingers. In a world that had fallen apart, the dog remained his anchor. They had always been a strange pair. When Cole first met Koda, he'd been fresh off his third deployment, emotionally numb and sick of funerals. Koda, barely 2 years old at the time, had belonged to no one yet. He was raw potential wrapped in teeth and muscle. They had tested each other from day one, Cole's calm, steely exterior against Koda's defiant spirit. But somewhere in the noise of shouted commands and obstacle courses, they'd found rhythm. Trust. He remembered one moment with painful clarity. During a joint raid in Iraq, a hidden shooter had fired from a rooftop just as they were clearing a courtyard. Koda had leapt sideways, tackling Cole to the ground before the bullet struck. The scar still ran across Cole's shoulder. He told himself it was just training, just instinct. But even then, he knew better. Koda didn't obey out of habit. He chose him. Just like he was choosing him now. Cole gritted his teeth, trying again to sit up. Pain exploded through his leg, white-hot and merciless. He collapsed back against the ground, a strangled groan slipping from his lips. They were alone, separated from the rest of the team. No comms. No medic. No cover. Only a dog and a soldier with one leg useless and the other full of shrapnel. The sun dipped lower, casting the valley in a ghostly blue haze. Long shadows crept across the stone. Coda moved suddenly, ears perked. He stood rigid, nose lifted, sniffing the breeze. Cole could hear nothing, but he trusted the dog more than his own fading senses. Something, or someone, was nearby. Coda let out a soft growl and moved to stand protectively in front of Cole. His hackles rose, his body coiled like a spring. Minutes passed. Then a rustle of movement echoed from the trees. A fox, maybe? Or worse. But no danger came. Not yet. Cole's breath rattled in his chest. He reached again for Coda. Find them, he whispered. Get help. Coda turned, eyes meeting his, but didn't move. Go, Cole said, louder now, struggling to inject command into his voice. Go, Coda! Still, the dog didn't budge. Cole swore softly, pain lacing each syllable. Of course he wouldn't leave. He should have known. The memory of their last training session surged into his mind, Coda refusing to return to base after Cole faked injury during an exercise. The other handlers laughed. Your mutt's too soft, one had joked. But Cole had seen it differently. It wasn't softness. It was loyalty. Unbreakable. Unyielding. Night fell fast in these mountains. The temperature dropped like a stone. Cold pressed against Cole's skin, biting and sharp. He shivered violently. Coda, sensing it, curled up beside him, pressing their bodies together for warmth. The stars emerged, brilliant, sharp, and silent. Cole looked up at them, a sea of light that mocked the darkness below. His mind wandered untethered. He thought of home. Of the desert training grounds where he and Coda had first learned to trust each other. Of the letter he never mailed to his sister. Of the smell of rain on the tarmac in Fort Bragg. He didn't want to die here. Not like this. Not forgotten in a canyon a world away from everything that mattered. Coda stirred again, his ears twitching. He stood and moved a few feet, sniffing the ground. He returned with something in his jaws, Cole's emergency satchel. The dog dropped it next to him and nudged it open with his nose. Inside was a half-crushed water pouch, a signal flare, and a field tourniquet. Cole blinked, stunned. How the hell? Coda lay back down, eyes never leaving him. Cole fumbled with the tourniquet, managing to loop it around his shredded thigh. He cinched it tight, biting down a scream. The pain was unbearable, but the bleeding slowed. He drank from the pouch, each drop like fire and life combined. Coda licked his face again, gently, as if reassuring him. We're not done yet. Time passed. Maybe hours. Maybe minutes. The night blurred. At one point, Cole thought he saw movement, shapes in the dark. Men with rifles, moving silently. Taliban? Rescue? He didn't know. He raised his pistol weakly, but his arm trembled too much to aim. Coda was at his side in an instant, tail stiff, growling low and dangerous. The shapes didn't approach. Cole's vision dimmed again. He remembered his first real conversation with Coda. Not a command, but a whisper, something only the dog heard. Don't ever leave me. It was stupid. Sentimental. But now, it echoed in his head like a vow. And somehow, the dog had remembered. As dawn teased the horizon with its pale fingers, Cole's breathing slowed. He fought to stay awake, but his body was shutting down. He looked at Coda one last time. The dog didn't move. Didn't blink. Just lay with his head on Cole's chest, as if holding his heartbeat in place. Above them, the sky began to lighten. Somewhere far off, a helicopter chopped through the silence. Cole didn't know if it was real. But Coda lifted his head and barked, once, loud and defiant, against the quiet of death. And that sound, that one fearless cry, was enough to keep hope alive for another hour. The rising sun painted the Afghan valley in shades of gold and blood. The heat would come soon, But for now, the wind was still cool, whispering through the trees as if mourning something unseen. Coda remained motionless beside Evan Cole, his ears twitching at every rustle, his eyes scanning for threats only he could sense. The soldier still lay half buried in the dust, his breathing ragged, his skin pale. The makeshift tourniquet had stopped the bleeding, but the damage inside his leg was worsening by the hour. Infection was setting in. Without help, death was inevitable. Cole stirred, his eyelids fluttering. Pain clawed its way through his body like a wildfire, but something else pulled him awake, a sound. Not a voice, not movement, but the soft, rhythmic panting of the dog beside him. The sound of presence. Of life. "Still here," he murmured hoarsely. Coda lifted his head, eyes meeting his, and let out a soft whine. Cole reached out with a shaking hand, his fingers barely brushing Coda's neck. The fur was warm. It grounded him. Time passed strangely in this place. Daylight didn't bring safety. It only made them visible. Cole knew they were still in enemy territory. If the blast hadn't killed him, the patrols surely would. And if not them, the hunger, thirst, or infection would finish the job. Coda stood suddenly, nose to the wind. His tail went rigid. Cole tried to listen, but all he heard was the hollow thump of his own pulse. Coda took a few steps toward the brush line, pausing, ears turning like satellite dishes. Then he was gone, disappearing silently into the foliage. Panic stabbed through Cole's chest. "No," he whispered, throat raw. "Don't leave." Seconds stretched. Then minutes. The ache of abandonment began to swell, even though part of him knew the dog hadn't fled. Not Coda. He was doing something. But what? Just as Cole was about to surrender to the dark thoughts creeping in, Coda reappeared, carrying something in his mouth. A shredded canteen. Cole blinked in disbelief as the dog trotted up and dropped the metal bottle near his hand. Water sloshed inside. He didn't ask how. Didn't want to imagine what risk the dog had taken. He drank slowly, coughing after each sip, but the water cooled his cracked throat and lit a tiny flame of hope inside his chest. Coda settled back beside him, watchful but calm. Cole realized then that the dog had taken on more than a guardian role. He had become nurse, scout, sentinel, and silent companion. A lifeline in a place designed to take lives. Later, as the sun climbed and the temperature rose, the valley transformed into a crucible. Flies buzzed. The scent of blood grew thick. Cole slipped in and out of consciousness. During one spell, he imagined being back in North Carolina, sitting on the porch of his sister's cabin, the scent of pine in the air and Coda at his feet. That memory felt real, more real than the scorched dirt beneath him now. When he came to again, the shadows were longer. Coda wasn't beside him. Cole tried to raise his head, but a sharp sting in his side stopped him. He hissed, gritting his teeth. He turned slightly, searching. A crunch. A low snarl. Coda exploded from the brush, dragging something through the grass. It took Cole a moment to understand. It was the leg of a Taliban scout. The body was still twitching. Coda's muzzle dripped blood. Cole stared, stunned. The dog had defended him, again. Alone. Without hesitation. Even in the face of a man with a gun. The scout's rifle was nearby. Coda had neutralized him before he could fire. For a long time, Cole said nothing. He couldn't speak. His emotions churned in layers, relief, horror, awe, and something deeper, something close to guilt. Coda wasn't bred for this. He had been trained, yes. But he was supposed to be part of a team. A unit. Not a lone warrior tasked with keeping a half-dead man alive in hostile territory. And yet here they were. Cole forced himself to crawl closer to the rifle. His arms trembled, the movement sending white-hot spears of agony through his body. But he reached it. Loaded. Ready. He dragged it to his side and collapsed again, panting. "Good boy," he whispered, but his voice cracked. Coda nudged his arm, then curled back around his torso, resting his head on Cole's chest. The weight was comforting. Night came again, and with it, the howl of wolves from far-off ridges. Koda listened but didn't flinch. He kept his head up, watching the dark. Cole faded again. This time into dreams. Fractured images, explosions, screaming, running. He was shouting for his team, for Reyes, for anyone. But the only one who answered was Koda, always Koda. When he awoke, the wind was colder. The stars had dimmed behind a veil of gray. Dawn was approaching, but not fast enough. His body was failing. His thoughts were beginning to slip. He whispered nonsense. Childhood songs. Military codes. The alphabet backward. Anything to stay tethered. At one point, he reached for Koda's paw and held it, as if gripping a rope that could pull him back from whatever cliff he was slipping toward. "Tell them I tried," he murmured. "Tell them I fought." Koda pressed closer. Hours passed. Back at the forward operating base, Corporal Elena Reyes sat at the communications console, staring at the screen showing the last known locations of Cole's unit. Command had written him off. Kia. She had fought the decision but lost. But what she hadn't told anyone was that Koda's GPS implant had still been sending signals, irregular, weak, but real. She had traced the last signal to a valley known for ambushes. It had gone dark shortly after. She hadn't shared this with Command. They wouldn't believe her. But she believed. She always had. She opened her encrypted laptop and began building a new search grid. Quietly. Without authorization. If Cole and Koda were out there, they didn't have much time. Back in the valley, Cole coughed blood. The infection was in full bloom now. Fever raged through him. His skin felt like fire. His mind swam in hallucinations. He saw Koda as a man, standing tall in the uniform of a soldier, saluting him. He smiled. Then the hallucination twisted. Fire, screams, Koda's whimpers as bullets tore through the sky. Cole shouted, trying to warn him, but his voice made no sound. He awoke to pressure on his chest. Koda. Still there. Always there. Cole turned his head and whispered, "Don't die out here with me." But the dog merely wagged his tail once and stared into the distance, alert as ever. Suddenly, his ears perked sharply. He stood, muscles stiff. A low, urgent growl rumbled from his throat. Cole tensed. He couldn't hear anything. But he trusted Koda's instincts more than his own. The dog moved a few paces forward, staring into the trees. Then a sound reached them, a distant engine. Not a Taliban truck. Not local. A chopper? Cole couldn't believe it. His vision blurred. His pulse spiked. Koda barked once. Then again, louder. Cole fumbled with the signal flare in his satchel. His fingers were numb. His vision swam. But he managed to flick the cap off. His thumb slipped once, twice. Finally, the flare ignited, a bright red streak piercing the pale dawn sky. He held it high until his arm collapsed. Koda barked again, racing in circles, trying to be seen. Far above, the sound of rotors grew louder. Then darkness claimed him again. And in that silence, as the valley held its breath, the flare still burned, the dog still waited, and the rescue team began to descend. The buzz of hospital machinery formed a quiet, persistent symphony. Beeping monitors, gentle clicks, the soft hiss of oxygen. Evan Cole lay beneath white sheets in the medical wing at Ramstein Air Base, thousands of miles from the valley where he'd nearly died. The sterile lights above him were a strange comfort, like proof that he'd survived. But even now, his eyes searched the room before settling on the spot near the foot of his bed, where Koda should have been. He wasn't there. Cole shifted slightly, wincing as the pins in his leg bit down like teeth. The damage had been extensive. The blast hadn't just torn through muscle, it had fractured bone, severed nerves, and left his left foot partially paralyzed. He would walk again, they said, but not like before. Not like a soldier. The door opened quietly. Elena Reyes stepped in, her expression carefully neutral. She had dark circles under her eyes and a folder tucked under her arm. "Hey," she said, approaching. Cole gave her a faint nod. "You found us." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled up a chair beside the bed, setting the folder down. "You owe that dog your life," she finally said. "I know. He refused to leave your side," she added, voice catching slightly. "Even when the medics tried to load you," he growled. "They had to sedate him just to get you both on the bird." Cole stared at the wall. "Where is he now?" "Quarantine," she said. "He's recovering. He lost weight. Puncture wounds. Smoke inhalation. But he's stable." Cole's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "When can I see him?" She hesitated. "Soon. They're evaluating his behavior." "What behavior?" She looked down. "They're not sure if he's fit for service anymore. He's changed." Cole's heart thudded once, hard. "He saved me." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment. Then she slid the folder toward him. "I figured you'd want to see this. Report says you blacked out after firing the flare. The team landed 8 minutes later. Found you in and out of consciousness. Coda was circling, guarding you. One of the medics got too close. Coda bit his glove clean off." Cole's lips twitched into something like a smile. "He wouldn't let go," Reyes said. "Not even after they put a muzzle on him. He was doing his job. Even when everyone else thought you were dead." Cole reached out with trembling fingers and opened the folder. Photos, reports, comm logs. All of it pieced together the last 48 hours of hell. But one picture stopped him cold. Coda, crouched over his chest, eyes wild, fur singed, mouth drawn in a snarl as a medic approached. The photo wasn't meant to be beautiful, but to Cole, it was. He closed the folder. "I don't care what the evaluation says. He's done more than enough." Reyes sighed. "That's the problem." Cole's brow furrowed. "They think he's too bonded to you now. Too protective. Not stable around others. Not safe. So retire him." "They might," she said slowly. "But if they do, he won't come back here. He'll go through adoption channels." Cole stared at her. "You're kidding. It's protocol." "I don't give a damn about protocol. That dog didn't just save my life. He carried me through a war zone and guarded my body like I was his own. I'm not letting him go." Reyes nodded, unsurprised. "Then you're going to have to fight for him." Cole leaned back, eyes burning. "I've fought worse." Later that evening, alone in his room, Cole stared out the window as dusk crept in. The sky over Germany was pale and unfamiliar, streaked with soft lavender clouds. He thought about that valley, the fire, the pain, the way death had hovered above him like a vulture. He should have died there. Anyone else would have. But Coda had refused to let him. A soft knock drew his attention. A young nurse peeked inside. "Sir, you have a visitor." Cole's heart leapt. The door opened wider. And there he was, Coda, thin but upright, tail low but wagging slightly. A handler held his leash, speaking soft reassurances, but Coda didn't need them. He saw Cole. And he pulled forward with quiet urgency, ignoring the handler's commands. Cole sat up straighter, swallowing hard. "Let him go." The handler hesitated, then released the leash. Coda bolted to the bed, placing his front paws gently beside Cole's leg. Their eyes locked, no words, no commands. Just that silent, sacred bond that had carried them both back from the edge. Cole pressed his forehead to Coda's. "You made it, buddy." Coda whined softly, tail thumping once against the floor. It wasn't over. There were battles ahead, doctors, boards, decisions made behind glass by people who didn't know them. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They were together. And that was enough to keep fighting. The airport terminal buzzed with life, families reuniting, children squealing, soldiers returning to hugs and flags and tears. But Evan Cole moved through it quietly, cane in one hand, Coda's leash in the other. His left leg was bound in a rigid brace, each step slow but determined. The limp was permanent now, the doctors had said. Nerve damage. But he was alive, and Coda walked beside him, gaze scanning the crowd like he was still on patrol. The air smelled like pretzels and cheap coffee. It wasn't Afghanistan. It wasn't Germany. It was home. Or at least, the shell of what used to be home. Cole's sister, Natalie, spotted them first. She stood at the edge of the waiting area, arms folded tight around herself like she didn't believe it was real until she could touch him. When their eyes met, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He didn't flinch, but his body tensed. Reflexes honed by trauma don't die easily. "I thought they were wrong," she whispered. "I thought you were gone." "Me too," he said softly. Then she noticed the dog. Coda sat patiently at his side, eyes never leaving Cole. His fur had grown back where it had been scorched. Scars laced his flank, reminders of the valley. But he was steady. Proud. A soldier through and through. Natalie knelt. "So this is him?" "Coda," Cole said simply. Coda stepped forward and nudged her hand gently. "That dog didn't just save me," Cole added. "He wouldn't let me give up." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Then he's family now." The drive home passed in silence, broken only by the soft hum of tires and the wind through the open windows. North Carolina sprawled in green and gold around them. Rolling fields, thick woods, quiet towns that hadn't changed. But everything inside Cole had shifted. When they reached the house, Coda was the first to leap out of the truck, sniffing the porch, the air, the flower beds. He moved with curiosity, but also caution, as if trying to map out new territory. Natalie had already prepared a space for him, a soft bed in the den, a basket of toys, and a bowl engraved with his name. Cole stood at the threshold for a long moment before stepping inside. The familiar scent of pine wood and vanilla hit him like a memory he hadn't asked for. He limped through the hallway, pausing at photos on the wall. His military portrait stared back at him, young, straight-backed, full of belief. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't sure of who he was now. Later, as twilight settled over the porch, Cole sat in a wooden chair with a blanket over his knees. Coda lay beside him, eyes closed, but ears twitching at every sound. Crickets chirped in the grass. An owl hooted from somewhere in the trees. Cole sipped from a cup of black coffee and exhaled slowly. "They gave us medals," he said aloud, though mostly to himself. "Silver Star for me. Distinguished Service Cross for you. Posthumous recommendation until we turned up breathing." Coda gave a quiet huff. "They wanted to use our story. PR campaign. Inspiration piece. You know, man's best friend, all that." I said no. Coda opened one eye. "I didn't want them turning what we went through into a slogan." He looked down at the dog. "We earn peace. You especially." Coda reached out and laid his paw on Cole's foot. The VA appointments came next. Endless questions, long waits, sterile rooms. Cole sat through every psych eval, every physical therapy session. He spoke when he had to, but never about the valley. The fire. The blood. That part lived in a locked room inside him, and the only one with a key was curled up beside his bed each night. The nightmares came anyway. He would wake up drenched in sweat, gasping, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Each time, Coda would be already at his side, pressing against him, anchoring him to the moment. No words were needed. No commands. They both carried invisible wounds. Word spread about them in the local veteran community. People stopped him in stores, saluted him at gas stations. Some wanted to hear the story, but Cole rarely told it. Not out of pride, but because putting it into words made it smaller somehow, less sacred. It wasn't about heroics. It was about survival. About a dog that refused to let death win. One evening, Cole walked into a nearby school auditorium to speak at a Veterans Night event. He hated public speaking. But this felt different. He stepped to the podium, cane in hand, and looked out at a small crowd. Parents. Teachers. Students. His voice was quiet at first. "I don't remember the moment I gave up," he began. "But I remember the moment something else didn't let me." He paused, glancing at Coda sitting by the stage, alert but calm. "This is Coda," he said. "And if you want to know what courage looks like, don't look at me. Look at him." He told them the truth. Not the polished version, but the raw one. About fear, pain, loyalty that defied orders. About waking up surrounded by death and finding life standing guard at your side. Afterward, no one clapped for a long time. Then the room erupted, not with cheers, but with something heavier. Respect. Gratitude. Recognition. Back at home, Cole opened the door and let Coda off the leash. The dog trotted ahead, tail wagging lightly, and disappeared into the backyard. Cole followed, slower but steady. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. Familiar, grounding. He closed his eyes and let it pass over him. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was this moment. It was breath. It was survival. It was the quiet sound of paws on grass and the unspoken promise that, whatever came next, they would face it together. Changed. But not broken.